All right, good afternoon. Thanks very much for joining us. Today we'll be briefly discussing two new treatments for the treatment of chronic hepatitis C. These two treatments are Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir. So the webinar is being provided today by the Canadian Treatment Action Council. My name is Adam Cook, and I'm a policy researcher with CTAC. We are Canada's national civil society organization addressing access to treatment, care, and support for people living with HIV and hepatitis C. Part of what we do in addressing access to medications is inform Canadians at large about new medications for HIV and HCV, survey those Canadians for their input on those treatments in question, and then write reports to federal and provincial regulatory bodies about those treatments under review. So I'll remind you, of course, that the webinar is being recorded right now. It'll be posted online for viewing later, and we will be issuing two surveys, both of which will be available for a week for you to review and complete, at the conclusion of which we'll be writing and submitting our report. So just a little bit about our agenda today. We'll briefly discuss the medications we're reviewing, in so much as they are being reviewed by Canadian federal bodies. We'll also look at some of the key attributes of Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir. Then we're going to review some of the data from clinical trials, and we'll conclude with a couple of parting statements and direction to the surveys. So we're conducting this review today because these two drugs are now under review by the Common Drug Review, or the CDR. Now, the CDR is the review body that makes a recommendation as to whether or not a drug should be listed on public insurance plans. So as part of that review process, the CDR solicits opinions from Canadians about the drugs they review. So again, that's what we're doing here. We'll let you know about the drug, you complete the survey, and based on that survey data, we'll let the CDR know what you think. And again, we do this for all HIV and HCV medications under review. Normally, we begin these webinars with a brief overview of how the Common Drug Review works. Regular participants in our webinars have noted that process doesn't change much. So we are now developing a standalone video on the Common Drug Review. It should be done next month. In the meantime, for a primer on the Common Drug Review, there's a link here to CTAC, where the Common Drug Review is conducted. And then there's a brief link to a past webinar we've done that goes over the CDR in more detail. So here we have the two drugs in question, Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir. Both are manufactured by Bristol Myers Squibb. Asunaprevir is a little younger than Daclatasvir, and Daclatasvir is often found as the brand name Daclinza. One note here, this webinar will be unique in relation to our usual webinars. In this case, the manufacturer has submitted each drug independently to the Common Drug Review. So one submission for Daclatasvir, one submission for Asunaprevir. Now this is unusual because each drug really only appears as components of other medications. So in the trials, we'll look at Daclatasvir plus Asunaprevir, but often there will be a third drug involved. Sometimes it's Daclatasvir with Sulkowski, with no Asunaprevir. Other trials have looked at Asunaprevir with other components. So we'll go over each drug and its inclusion into other treatments, but the final surveys will measure each drug independently. So we'll try to minimize the confusion there. Part of this is how the review system works. Part of this is, in the manufacturer's defense, getting these two individual components approved so that we can do more involvement in them with other medications. So these two medications sit rather nicely in that while other treatments are focused on a very broad range of patients, these two specific components might be useful included in other treatments for special populations. But we'll go over that a little more as we proceed. You'll also see that I've listed two other drugs here, Daclatasvir and Sulkowski. These are often used in combination with Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir. In fact, you'll see that in some of the trial data we look at. The Daclatasvir is a BMS drug. And Sulkowski, of course, is manufactured by Gilead and is the sole component in the infamous pill Sovaldi. So there is some matching with Sulkowski in this clinical trial as well. So as I've said, the CDR applications are for each drug separately. However, this webinar is going to cover both. So this is because both meds appear in conjunction with one another often, but they're also two very popular medications for trial, and they're often combined with many other agents in experimental review. We hypothesize, as I've said, that's part of the reason they're being reviewed independently, so as to further allow doctors and researchers to evaluate adding them to regimens. So again, here we see DCV is Daclatasvir, ASV is Asunaprevir. These are just some of the combinations that are being looked at with these two drugs in combination with Daclatasvir, BCV, Sulkowski, SOF. And then some of you may be a little disappointed to see the continued inclusion of RBV, which is ribavirin. We're not quite out of the ribavirin woods yet. It's still being involved in some medications in trial. And of course, for many contemporary hepatitis C medications, you may still be prescribed ribavirin with new treatments, depending on your patient profile. So we're going to look at some clinical trial data, which is what the CDR will also do. CDR will also look at the information that you provide to us in the report we deliver. But this is also our main ability to evaluate the safety and efficacy of the drug. So specifically, we'll look at the Unity series of studies, the Ally series of studies, a BMS study done by Dr. Mark Sulkowski, and then the HALLMARK-DUAL study. As I've said, there have been other many significant studies being done, so it's worth noting the dual and quad studies here, which again are Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir combined. So let's look first at Unity 1. Unity 1 is combining Daclatasvir, Asunaprevir, and Daclatasvir. And it's a study to prove that this triple combination is better than pegylated interferon and ribavirin, and or better than Asunaprevir with pegylated interferon and ribavirin. Now that shouldn't be a hard measure to beat, as those SVRs are 79 and 48% respectively. So SVR, of course, is sustained virologic response. That's how we measure a cure of hepatitis C. The going rate for this in present contemporary treatment is SVR12, which means we hope for a sustained virologic response at week 12 of treatment. We usually evaluate that by week 24 to say that it has been cleared by week 12, so we are looking at SVR12 here. And again, the numbers, what they're challenging here are some older therapies, so they really shouldn't be hard to beat in the Unity trial. We're looking at specifically non-challenging populations in this trial, mostly GT1A, but some GT1Bs as well. Mostly, again, with demographics in large trials like this, we have mostly men, mostly white, but in this case we have a full fifth were prior non-responders, which is a difficult group. This is a very traditional study demographic. So again, these are the arms of the trial. It's actually quite simple. Treatment experience versus treatment naive patients taking the same meds. So again, a triple therapy involving Daclatasvir as well as Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir. Single tablet, twice daily. And again, just evaluating patients who have experience versus patients who have no experience and seeing how they deal with that combination. And here are the results. Treatment naive cleared the virus in 12 weeks at 92% of that population. So SVR12, 92%. And experienced folks at about 89%. These are decent numbers, but it's very much what we expect in second and third generation direct-acting antivirals, which is the group of drugs that hepatitis C is presently being treated with. There were some GT1Bs involved in this test. Again, that's another genotype of hepatitis C, and they did exceptionally well at 98 and 100% naive to experience. So particularly effective with that genotype. Also worth noting here is that we see a lot of studies now are checking for viral clearance at 4 weeks. Now that's not saying that the study's done at 4 weeks or that they've achieved SVR at 4 weeks. We're just looking at how it looks at 4 weeks and to see if they're undetectable at that period, because it's a great predictor of SVR12. More and more trials are doing this. It's a testament to the efficacy of new drugs that those SVR predictors have been scaling back consistently. You know, we used to look at SVR12 was a predictor, SVR8 was a predictor. We're looking at SVR4 as a predictor in many trials now. Unity does that as well, and they had 75% of all patients were undetectable at week 4. So again, this combination seems to hit early, hit hard, and even by week 4 we see substantial viral clearance. We're also noting adverse events in this trial. They were minor, they're considered mild. Most often people experienced headache, fatigue, diarrhea, and nausea, but not much worse than that. These are 3 treatments that are generally considered pretty well tolerated, and this trial seems to back that up. So what kind of summary statement can we say about the Unity-3 trial? It's very much a good example of how modern trials are going right now. Very streamlined demographics, 4-week predictors, and gunning for SVR12 with follow-ups afterwards. We can say that this triple therapy is consistent with other treatments, but it really doesn't blow anything away as far as what's on the market presently. It's safe and it's tolerable, but really the sterling piece here for me is that it might represent a very interesting and effective treatment option for GT1Bs specifically. So let's look at another part of the Unity series. This is Unity 2. Again, we'll look at the phase 3 data from that. And this one is looking at Daclatasvir, Asunaprevir, and Daclatasvir again, but in this case, we are now evaluating whether or not adding ribavirin helps. So again, a single tablet regimen, but this time we are including ribavirin with some and not including ribavirin with others. The demographics on this one, they start to get a little more interesting as we proceed along these trials, but here we're involving some cirrhotics in the study, so that's a challenging population. We've also got a lot of people here who are treatment experienced, who were treated unsuccessfully in the past. So again, if you had failed treatment in the past, you become more challenging to treat in the future. So we've got some treatment naive and treatment experienced folks in here. Again, pretty standard demographics, not very real world yet, but there are clear indications here that they're trying to sort of streamline different populations in here, cirrhotics specifically. So again, pretty simple trial design on this one. We've got 4 arms. You'll notice right away it's treatment naive versus treatment experienced again. And the big variable here is whether or not you're getting a placebo or ribavirin. So pretty good, pretty standardized trial design here. Again, we're gunning for SVR12, but follow-ups into week 24. And again, we're pairing with Daclatasvir, BCV. So let's look at some of the results. Right away, a minimum of 93% of patients achieved SVR12, no matter which group they were in. So that's good. That's very contemporary. We're again seeing improved efficacy for GT1B patients. So again, whether it's Daclatasvir, Asunaprevir, or Daclatasvir, GT1B patients seem to be benefiting. And while we would like to eliminate ribavirin from the spectrum of options here, it is associated with some improved benefit for GT1B and or people who failed previous treatment. So again, we'd love to get rid of ribavirin. It's got some adverse effects that many people find difficult, and it's an older medication, so it's very often been paired with pegylated interferon in the history of treatment. So it is, again, it's something we're trying to move away from, but still, clinical trial data shows us that there may be very specialized roles for ribavirin, but admittedly, we are seeing a reduced place for it. It is just important to keep in mind that it's still on the menu as far as treatment is concerned. So we'll look at some of the adverse events. They were, again, mild, but we do see pruritus and insomnia that are traditionally associated with ribavirin. Ribavirin is known for some skin issues specifically. Pruritus is the fancier word for itching and light rashing. So ribavirin has been associated with skin effects, so itching, rashing. In past treatments involving ribavirin at larger quantities, rashes have been all over the map, some very significant, some not so. But that is important to keep in mind. So a lot of the adverse events here we see are attributable to the addition of ribavirin. Most were considered tolerable and mild, but it's important to note almost 80% of all patients had some adverse event. So most people experience something, but almost everyone finds it to be very, very tolerable. Right? And as a testament to that, 98% of patients completed the treatment. So it is pretty well tolerable, but again, the addition of ribavirin does introduce some new adverse events. Again, just like Unity 2, we're proving that this combo is effective, specifically with GT1B, and like I said, including ribavirin might improve outcomes for patients who have failed treatment in the past. So let's look at the ALLY 3 study. ALLY 3 is evaluating Daclatasvir plus Sulkowski. So again, Sulkowski, famously the sole component of the Sovaldi pill. In fact, in this combination includes 400 milligrams of Sulkowski. So this is basically Sovaldi plus 60 megs of Daclatasvir, and that's sort of where we're at here. Even if you look at the Gilead pill Harvoni, that again is Sulkowski plus just 90 milligrams of Ladipasvir. So there is some co-formulation going on here. It'll be interesting to see how that develops. Again, with this trial, we're looking specifically at GT3 patients and those who are considered part of the unmet need population. So we're looking at people who've had a liver transplant. We're looking at people with HIV co-infection. So again, the demographics here are starting to get a little more real-worldy, and they're starting to look specifically at special populations with unmet needs. In the experienced cohort here, we see that almost 80% were relapsers or partial and null responders. So you can start to see how the trials for these medications are really starting to narrow in on unmet need populations, specifically addressing people for whom other treatments may not necessarily be an option. So with that in mind, the manufacturer should certainly be commended for looking at those populations. I will say that in the grand context, it is rather unusual to look at some of those populations early in trial data. So that's certainly worth noting. And again, simple trial design. We're comparing treatment experience versus treatment naive with the same medication. We're looking for SVR12 with regular follow-ups. But again, pretty simple. So let's look at the results. Here we see that the treatment-naive population did slightly better, as did those with F3 liver damage compared to those with F4 liver damage. So really heavy liver damage was more difficult than people with slightly less liver damage. Again, week 4 is being used as a strong indicator, and efficacy was consistent among the many subgroups evaluated. So that's important because, as I've said, these subgroups are some pretty interesting ones. So to see consistent efficacy across that group is a very good sign. Further, again, this combination is considered tolerable with very mild side effects, and absolutely no one discontinued due to adverse effects. That's good news. We've seen DCV and ASV, Daclatasvir, Asunaprevir, associated with mild or tolerable effects. We already know Sulkowski is considered very tolerable, so there are no surprises here as far as adverse events. So what can we really say about Daclatasvir and Sulkowski as a combination? Very tolerable, very safe. Non-cirrhotics perform better than cirrhotics, but that's par for the course. That's usually how treatment goes. And this still looks like a viable treatment option for cirrhotics with that in mind. It also becomes a choice for GT3, genotype 3 patients, so that's also very good. Again, streamlining and looking at different populations in this trial, they seem to come out of it with results that reinforce their reasons for looking at those populations specifically. After the ALLY study, we have the BMS study group, which was led by Dr. Mark Sulkowski, who does great work in hepatitis C research. This trial gets a little bit convoluted with a lot of interesting variables. It's a fascinating study. I will simplify it, probably grossly so for the purposes of this presentation, but it is very fascinating with some really interesting results. This replicates the Ally 3 study to a degree in that it's looking at Daclatasvir and Sulkowski, but again, we're evaluating the efficacy of adding ribavirin. And for me, what's really interesting and placing this study specifically in a timeline of hepatitis C treatment is that this trial is also looking at people who have failed previous treatments involving Asunaprevir and Asunaprevir. So those two, Asunaprevir and Asunaprevir, are two very important direct-acting antivirals that are older. So it's really interesting, in my opinion, in the hepatitis C treatment timeline, that we're now evaluating how much better newer drugs are to older drugs. Now that sounds very intuitive, but consider that hepatitis C medication development is happening so fast that we're already looking at drugs 5 years old as being obsolete, and whether or not we can beat them with stuff in trial right now. And even what's in trial now are co-formulations of drugs that are relatively old as well. So it's actually quite interesting. We're now seeing we've got the whole medical community, the patient community has bought into the concept of direct-acting antivirals. Now we're comparing them across generation and seeing how much better each generation is from the last. And again, that sounds very intuitive, but it hasn't been done yet with this class of drugs. So it's very interesting to see that in action. So that will also help us in considering how medications get phased out over the next 5-10 years and what public insurance plans will be approving. So to look at the populations who have failed that and whether or not we can treat them with new meds is extremely important, because as we know, the more often you've been treated and failed treatment, the more difficult it is to treat you again in the future. Now, whether or not that addition of ribavirin is going to help is again going to be tricky. We have seen that ribavirin is associated with improved outcomes for people who have failed treatments in the past, but it'll be interesting to compare that with past direct antivirals. So here are the arms, and I've already warned you, it's a bit of a mess. Looks like alphabet soup. There's so many different groups to measure and so many different ways to do so, but what's really important here is that arms A and arm B get Sulkowski alone for 7 days before beginning the combination therapy, and then groups I and groups G are solely made up of people who have failed Asunaprevir or Asunaprevir treatments in the past. Those are the big ones to keep in mind. And just to keep it nice and clean and simple, I'll add some more to the messy slide. Here are the results. There are really, really great numbers across the board, and there's lots to conclude here. But the important pieces for me are that past failure patients did very well with new generation treatments. So again, arms I and G at 100 and 95% respectively. Those are all groups. Those are hundreds and hundreds of people who took direct-acting antivirals and failed them and are now being treated with a newer direct-acting antiviral. And while we should expect they'll have a hard time, we're seeing exemplary numbers. So again, we're starting to see how these two drugs specifically might be finding their niche in treating prior non-responders or partial responders or null responders to past therapy. So we're really starting to see that develop in this trial data. We're also noting that the addition of ribavirin for GT or genotype 2 and 3 patients actually may not be associated with improved benefit. So that's good news, bad news. But let's sort of break down that data into some sort of summary statement. Again, GT1A and GT1B patients do great, but genotypes 2 and 3 not as well. The great news is that people who have failed Asunaprevir and Asunaprevir have treatment options that are very effective, safe, and fast. But GTs 2 and 3 don't do so well at SVR12. That's true, but this trial also evaluated again at 36 weeks. And by 36 weeks, those GT2 and GT3 naive patients got up to 98%. So what we may learn here is that this combination is still very good, it's still effective, but it may take a little longer for certain genotypes. Maybe it's not an option for genotype 2 and 3 as a quick, fast treatment. Maybe it's something for prior failing treatments more specifically. Again, the adverse events are very consistent with what we've seen so far, very mild, very tolerable, and very few people discontinued as a result of them. So again, the big takeaway for me here is that Daclatasvir Sulkowski is an option for past treatment failure patients. That's a huge population and one that's often ignored in treatment. So we see that they benefit from more time and from Sulkowski, but not necessarily from ribavirin. So again, a specialized but diminishing role for ribavirin, and specifically we can associate Daclatasvir with improved outcomes for people who have failed treatment in the past. And again, I'm pretty excited about that result. Finally, the last trial we're going to look at today is called the HALLMARK-DUAL trial. This is evaluating Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir together at last in a single capsule taken twice daily. So we're looking specifically at GT1B patients. We're involving cirrhotics and non-cirrhotics. And again, we're addressing patients in unmet need populations, and specifically patients who were intolerant to pegylated interferon and ribavirin, or were ineligible to receive it. And most of those ineligibilities would be due to health reasons, liver damage, so concerns about having that medication, which is a little hard to bear, well, very hard to bear, specifically for someone who's already incurred liver damage. So again, here are the arms of the study. Again, pretty simple design. Groups, or arms A and C, evaluate treatment experience versus no treatment experience. And arm B looks to isolate the effects of each component drug in the combo. And D looks specifically at hard-to-treat patients who couldn't take pegylated ribavirin, pegylated interferon or ribavirin. So right away, arm B ended up in another study, so the data there is lost to this trial specifically. We have to assume that their arm was showing interesting data or was otherwise needed in another study. For me, that makes perfect sense because, as I mentioned, arm B was specifically trying to isolate and evaluate Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir's effects on their own. So wouldn't that be golden information for us today when we're doing just that? But there is not much data on that, and specifically we can see why in this trial it was snatched up for inclusion into another trial. And then what I imagine would happen there is trying to look at the long-term effects of that combination and those two pieces in isolation. So it's a little frustrating, but it certainly makes sense. Otherwise, arm A of treatment-naive patients did best. Other arms were, in my opinion, not as effective as other contemporary treatments, so really the arm A results are the only ones that sit in the contemporary hepatitis C treatment window for me. And that would be a window of efficacy, of course. So it's important to note that this trial evaluated Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir together. It seems to reaffirm that these two drugs are best paired with a third or component, or only one of Daclatasvir or Asunaprevir be used with another potent antiviral. Together, we see that Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir are not really the most effective treatments. When we're looking at some other treatments are in 96, 98, 100%. 90% is, to be quite frank, on the low end of where contemporary treatments are sitting right now. So again, it doesn't really blow anything else out of the water when these two are paired together, but it's when we see them paired with a third component, a fourth component, and directed towards a special population who may have been ignored in the past, then we start to really see some impressive numbers. They are, however, like I said, important components, and I think it's important, again, to reiterate that while we're evaluating these independently, and they're being filed to the CDR independently, most of their value comes from being a component and from addressing those special unmet need populations. So it might not be a first-line regimen for everyone, but past treatment failures, people with liver damage, they might find that a viable treatment option because specifically they're safe and well tolerated in some of our sicker patients. So we've looked at the clinical trial data. Let's boil down and let's summarize what we know about some of the kinetics, some of the adverse events going on here. We have seen that both of these medications are safe and well tolerated. When adding ribavirin, we see the usual ribavirin side effects, pruritus and insomnia. So insomnia, obviously difficulty sleeping, and pruritus, itching, and I might go so far as to say other dermatological events like rash is often associated with ribavirin. It's also worth noting these two drugs are still being tested in all sorts of combinations, so we may learn more, and ultimately adverse events will really depend on what these treatments are paired with, what they're co-formulated with, and what other drugs are involved in those single tablets. We do associate these two meds, Asunaprevir and Daclatasvir, however, with headache, fatigue, nausea, and diarrhea. Those seem to be very consistent with Asunaprevir and Daclatasvir. So what can we say about these two drugs? First of all, they seem to be components. On their own or together, they're not more effective than anything else on the market, really. So their strengths are that they show efficacy when paired with other drugs, and specifically with Sulkowski and Daclatasvir. So everyone is pairing with Sulkowski these days because it's very, very effective. But there have been cases where the manufacturer of Sulkowski, Gilead, may appear to be hesitant to market a treatment that's combined with a competitor's treatment. Again, we can look at how Harvoni came to be. The addition of Ladipasvir, that was something Gilead developed to add to their own medication. There were other medications very similar to Ladipasvir being manufactured by other companies, but that's not how that worked out. So that's worth keeping in mind. Also, Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir appear to be good options for special populations, right? And here I mean those with HIV co-infection, those with cirrhosis, those with heavy liver damage, those who have failed past treatments, and not just pegylated interferon and ribavirin past treatments, but past treatments from the last generation of direct-acting antivirals. So again, we're building on HCV treatment so fast. I can't overstate that. So while many medications out there are good options for first-line regimens, Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir are important in their contribution to treating smaller, more specialized populations. Again, most often we find this in a single tablet regimen, safe, well-tolerated, with minimal drug-drug interactions. And I imagine you would anticipate there would be minimal drug-drug interactions in two drugs whose strengths are that they pair well with others. That would certainly make sense. So now it is your turn. So as mentioned, we'll ask you to complete a survey and we'll write the report to the CDR. We'll do most of the heavy lifting on this one. We'll let them know what you thought of the drug and how these treatments sit in the contemporary landscape of other treatments, because again, it's a very dynamic, very vibrant landscape of treatment for new hepatitis C medications. So it is important to keep on top of this development, and that's part of what we're doing here today. The CDR will receive your feedback. We supply reports for every HIV and HCV medication. We are a regular customer in this process, so they will receive your input, but it will be anonymous, okay? The surveys are anonymous. There's no names associated with anything, and even when we record these webinars, we do tend to delete the question periods when they occur. So here again are a couple of quick links, a primer on the common drug review, how it works, and then some hepatitis C basics. Again, this is a tool sheet from Katie. Katie does amazing, fantastic work. If ever you're looking for information on HIV, hepatitis C, I would suggest Katie is your first resource. So again, there's a really helpful link for that site. And finally, I'd like to thank you very kindly for your attention. I sincerely appreciate it. I'm really grateful for your participation. The work we do as far as letting the CDR know about new treatments, and specifically what patients and Canadians think about new treatments is so important. You have to understand that when the CDR sits down at that table, they get a whole bunch of pharmacological data, they get product monographs, they get a lot of medical science information, but they want to hear from regular Canadians, from people discussing real-world needs about these drugs. So this is a really, really important part of that process. So again, I'm very grateful for it, and I'd like to sincerely thank you for your participation today. With that in mind, if anyone has any questions at all, I'd certainly take them. You can press #6 to mute your line and ask any questions. So I'll hold up for the next 30 seconds or so, see if we have any questions, and if not, I'll thank you again for your time today, and I will certainly let you know of the next webinar that we intend to host. So thanks very much. All right, doesn't look like we have any questions. So again, thank you so much. The survey links are found in the email that I've sent out earlier. But we will also we'll also be sending out that survey data for you moving forward, just so everyone has a chance to fill out that survey. If you're still on the line and looking for it because you don't want to check out your email, I've put them up on the site right here. So go ahead and click those links, and you'll be directed right to the Daclatasvir and Asunaprevir surveys. Again, 2 separate surveys because 2 separate applications, but we've talked about both of them today. So again, thank you very much for your time, and have a great day.